news. Now, we've been talking about real estate for quite a while, and we started to look at real estate, and we saw that things were breaking apart before really anyone else saw it. Everyone was saying real estate's fantastic, it looks great, and we were saying that this was a huge bubble. It was inflated, it's illusionary, and people were out there saying, well, it wasn't happening in my area, it's not happening in my area. Now, things are changing around. Things are happening in certain people's areas, and it's happening around the world. I mean, we've been talking about how the bubble is popping in Australia, Canada, and the UK. Now, the UK, their home values, they declined for a fifth consecutive month in July. This is the longest losing streak since the global financial crisis. Now, according to a report from Acadata, British home prices dropped by 0.2% last month to an average $302,000. This is about $386,000 per home. Now, home sales in London declined by 7% year on year. Now, this all coincided with decline in effective demand, both among EU and non-EU citizens. Now, of course, what they're doing is they're blaming this all on the Brexit, saying, oh, it's because of the Brexit, this is why you see this happening. Well, Australia's real estate is declining, and what does that have to do with the Brexit? Canada's real estate is declining. What does that have to do with the Brexit? In the U.S., we see real estate declining right now. What does that have to do with the Brexit? It doesn't. What's happening here is the bubble is deflating. It's losing air. It's losing its steam. And we'll be going into that in a minute, where Wolf Richter really describes and explains how we've hit this point where everything's starting to switch now and everything's starting to come down. But we need to remember that all these numbers that are thrown out there, like GDP, unemployment, and the rest, these are just numbers. And we need to remember something very important, that the stock market was soaring. The GDP numbers looked okay just prior to the great financial crisis of 2008. And we saw how that all turned out. The truth is that GDP is not the best measure for the health of an economy. Yes, the corporate media, yes, the government, yes, the Fed could say, yes, GDP, if it's a higher number, it means the economy is doing well. But judging the U.S. economy by GDP is basically like measuring the financial health of an individual by how much money he or she spends. And if I went out right now and I got a whole bunch of new credit cards and started spending money like there was no tomorrow, would that mean that my financial condition had improved? No. In fact, it would mean that my long-term financial condition just got a whole lot worse because I'm putting myself into debt. GDP is a measurement of how much economic activity is happening in our society and is basically an indication of how much money is changing hands. But just because more money is changing hands does not mean that things are going well. What really matters is what is happening to assets and liabilities. In other words, is wealth being built or is more debt just being accumulated? And as we can see, a lot more debt is being accumulated. Economic growth that is produced by continually increasing the amount of debt is not a positive thing. I mean, think about when the corporate media comes out and says, oh, look, spending is up, people are spending like crazy, and they show how much people have put onto their credit cards. That is just debt. That's not their money. They're borrowing that money with either 15, 20, or 30% interest. That doesn't mean the economy is doing well. But the central bankers have brainwashed all of us into thinking that more debt means that things are better. If you are spending and putting all this on your credit cards, it is better. No, it's actually worse. And we can see this by certain numbers. Now let's take a look at this. The U.S. consumer credit just hit another all-time record high. In the second quarter of 2008, total consumer credit reached a grand total of $2.63 trillion. And now, 10 years later, that number has soared to $3.87 trillion. This is an increase of 48% in just one decade. Student loan debt has surpassed $1.5 trillion for the first time ever. Over the last 8 years, the total amount of student loan debt has shot up 79% in the United States. According to the Federal Reserve, the credit card default rate in the U.S. has risen for 7 quarters in a row. One recent survey found that 42% of American consumers pay their credit card bill late, at least once in the last year, and 24% of American consumers pay their credit card bills late more than once in the last year. Real wage growth in the United States declined by the most we've seen in 6 years. According to a recent study, the rate of people 65 and older filing for bankruptcy is 3 times what it was in 1991. We are in the midst of the greatest retail apocalypse in American history. At this point, 57 major retailers have announced store closing so far in 2018, and we know there's going to be a lot more. The size of the official U.S. budget deficit is up 21%. It is being projected that interest on the national debt will surpass $500 billion for the first time ever this year. And we're not even talking about the unfunded liabilities. Those are essentially future commitments that we've made that we don't have the money for at this moment. According to Professor Larry Kotlikoff, our unfunded liabilities are well in excess of $200 trillion right now. And when we start to look at all this, we can see that, the numbers that they're throwing at us, they really don't mean that much. When you look at the everyday person and how they're living, how they're doing, I'm not talking about hope. I'm not talking about, maybe one day I'll get a raise. I'm talking about what's happening right now. What's happening in real estate? What's happening in retail? What's happening during the holiday season? What's happening during the summer season with real estate? What's happening with the automobile manufacturers? Now they're hiding their data. They don't want you to know their deliveries. The Fed is hiding their data or changing their data. There's a reason for all of this. This central bank illusion is starting to fall apart. Now, Wolf Richter put this together, and he is showing that the housing market has hit an inflection point. And we've seen this before back in 2006-07. No one really noticed what it was before. They thought, it's just a little slowdown. Things will get better. No one really realized that we were heading for this major crash. Of course, the Fed was out there saying that everything was contained, and Larry Young from the National Association of Realtors said that things were going to get a lot better during the winter when everything was completely falling apart. Now, the inflection point, Wolf is saying, is in June. And this is how the inflection points show up at the subcontinuous level in all housing markets. The first obvious sign that something was up, that something wasn't going the right way, came on June 6, 2017, when the housing market in Sonoma County was still booming, according to the data. Now, Sonoma County is a little north of San Francisco between the Pacific and Napa County, and something very interesting is happening in this area. That brokers would receive a 1,000 cash raffle by Sotheby's for a broker's tour of 4 homes in the city of Novato, and Sotheby's was trying to sell this in this fashion. The $1,000 would go to the winning broker who sold the home. Now, these kinds of antics are beginning signs that it's getting tougher to sell homes at the prices sellers envision. In June and July of 2018, supply suddenly shot to the highest level in years. Now, the realtors up in this area, they are seeing something that's very strange, and now they're thinking back to what happened during 2006, 2007, leading into 2008, when things started to go a little crazy in the real estate market. What they're saying right now is that of the 114 new listings, 30 had been listed before and had been pulled because they didn't sell. And now they were back on the market as a new listing. Now, this was a common practice back in 2007, 2008, where if nobody was coming to your home, no one was visiting, you didn't have any offers, and you had it on there like 3 weeks or a month or so, and you had no nibbles whatsoever, you pulled it off the listing. And you waited for a certain period of time, maybe you got a different realtor, and then you put it back on as a new listing to make it seem like, oh, another house just came on. Look, let's go take a look at it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In a down market, it really doesn't work. Now, the broker is saying that during this period of time, there were 94 price reductions. Now, the question is, why are people reducing their prices? They're reducing their prices because there's no one out there that's willing to pay what they're trying to sell the house for. So what do? They start lowering it. They start lowering it even more and even more to hit that sweet spot where someone would come in and make an offer. And in a down market, you have to keep lowering. And the broker said that some days the price reductions alone exceed the new listings. Now, this is the beginning stages in one area. We're going to start to see this spread throughout the country. This is just the beginning. And remember, with what the central bank has been doing is they've been propping up 20 cities. Now that they didn't do the whole country. And it's going to start to fall apart in many of the outlying areas, and it's going to move into the cities just like it did in 2008. And we're already starting to see this happen. This is why we see Canada, the bubble popping. This is why we see Australia, the bubble popping. This is why we see the UK. It's popping over there in the United States. Here, it is beginning to pop, and we're starting to see prices come down, and traffic's going to start to dry up because people are going to start pulling their houses off the market. They're going to try all these different tricks that we just talked about, but we're going to start to see that they're not going to be able to sell their homes, and prices are going to come down even further. And all those people that were underwater once before, back in 2008, they're going to be underwater once again because their housing prices are going to drop far below than they were even before, because this time it's going to be much, much worse. Now, Kim.com is out there, and he is saying, listen, we are headed towards a financial disaster. And he's calling for the ditching of the US dollar. He says that it's depreciating, it's doomed, you better invest in gold and cryptocurrencies. He went on to say that, trust me, and he tweeted this out, buy crypto and gold. Your dollar will become worthless. With U.S. economic collapse, all old money currencies will crash. Times will get tough, but you'll be fine if you hedge some of your assets in preparation for the crash. The big crash is coming, 100%. And he went on to say that the average total debt per family in the U.S. is now at $845,000. The average unfunded liability in the U.S. is now at $938,000 per taxpayer. Anyone who thinks the U.S. debt can be solved with economic growth, new debt, or printing more dollars is an idiot. U.S. empire will default. And Kim.com, well, he's right that there's no way that this can be sustained, because with the government right now and with the Fed and everything else, there's no way to stop this. And they're not going to stop it. They're going to drive this economy to the edge. The only way to get out of the central banking system, remember, the dollar that you have in your hand, the 10, the 5, the 100, whatever you have, it is an instrument of debt. And this is a Federal Reserve debt note. It's not backed by anything. It has no value whatsoever. It's a piece of paper with ink on it. And you owe debt when you receive that. Everyone owes debt, because what this central bank does, and many others all around the world, all connected, they create this out of thin air, and they attach interest to it, and they loan it to governments. And the people have to pay this interest. This is why they need to collect taxes to pay for all of this. And it goes back to the central bank. It's a Ponzi scheme. And we can see right now the only way to get out of this system is to have this system crash and burn and destroy the system that we're in. and create a new system that is a people-run system. We don't need a private Western central bank loaning the people money where we have to pay back the interest on this money, because the people can create their own currency with no interest attached. And they can do this with cryptocurrency. They can do this with gold-backed notes. They can do it with many different methods. There's no reason to have a central bank. Why? Because they can keep the economy from crashing? How many crashes have we had since they came into existence? Many. And has the value of the dollar maintained its value? No. It is down 96, 97%. And the government and the people continually go into further and further debt. This is a no-win situation. And we can see that we're headed towards this end stage. Now, what's very interesting is that the Fed came out, and even though the GDP numbers were pushed up and unemployment is at its lowest and the economy is supposed to be thriving, the Fed looks like they might be making a decision not to raise interest rates anymore. Now, this is very interesting because all along they told us they were going to raise interest rates, and it looks like they're countering what Trump and the Patriots are trying to do. Remember, this is a battle going on right now between the central bankers, the deep state, and Trump and the Patriots. And you can see they're fighting it out. People don't realize this, but that's what's happening to gain and control the narrative of when this entire system comes down. And it looks like from everything that we've been following and all the indicators that we've been looking at, the economy, well, it doesn't have that much more to go before the whole thing just completely falls apart. It's starting to fall apart all around the world. Look what's happening out in Turkey right now. They're collapsing. This is going to spread to other emerging markets. Look what's happening in South America with Argentina, with Venezuela, with many other countries. It's all starting to fall apart. And we could see it with the housing market, with the economies of other countries. They're in debt. Everything's starting to happen all at once. And once it starts to go, whoever controls the narrative is going to control the next economic system. And hopefully, it's not the central banks. And this is the push right now, is to get the central banks out of our lives. But no matter what, we're going to be going through this transition. And you need to be ready and prepared for this.